Everybody to today's presentation on cultural intelligence, navigating diversity and style in global business. My name is Batul Sadik. I am the owner and chief personal stylist here at BHS Image Consulting. I work with women to assist them in building strong personal brands through style, etiquette training, and cultural coaching. I'm joined here by my colleague, Claudia Elias, who is an intercultural coach, owner of, and go ahead, Claudia, share that with everyone.
Yes, I run CE, Intercultural Consulting, and I work with leaders who are looking to navigate the global world and gain more confidence in their corporate business settings.
Thank you for that. And so today's presentation was really based on a need and a struggle that both Claudia and myself found in the individual clients that we work with who are in professional settings, who are consistently struggling with understanding cultural intelligence, not realizing how it affects their interactions, their own personal professional goals, but also the organizational goals at large. And so today we're going to present to you, and Claudia will start us off with really cultural awareness and intelligence. What is it? Who needs it? Why do we need it? And how to approach it. I will then move into talking about the style and image piece. How does that cultural awareness and intelligence really inform our personal style choices so that we can remain authentic and yet dress within context? What sets our service apart from so many other personal stylists and cultural coaches is that it's not just about dressing well in our local environments that we are accustomed to, but understanding it is about dressing within context, styling with purpose, as I like to call it. And so for individuals who are consistently spending time in leading diverse teams, traveling, whether it be domestically or abroad, it is so important that they have this coach and this guidance in navigating them through this diverse global landscape to really make it more efficient and overall more pleasant and a positive experience for everyone involved. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and start our presentation, which we have put together with that information to help guide you. And so we are going to move into Claudia, if you can take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Batul, for that lovely introduction. So we intended this presentation to be essentially your overview of our journey, of what we're trying to do here, of our mission, and go into this whole concept of cultural intelligence. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to start with our journey, and then we're going to go into the definition of cultural intelligence. We're going to explore cultural landscapes. How do you think about culture? We're going to ask who and why, who should be doing this, and why it matters. And then what are the building blocks of this cultural competency? What's the road we need to take? And then finally, we're going to move away from the theory and the generalizations. We're going to start to apply this knowledge to style and how you should think about your appearance and how that matters. And then we'll finally end with Q&A. So let me tell you a little about myself. I've always been fascinated with world cultures and leadership. And so after graduating from my humanities program, I also was a leadership guide and trainer for those years in college, and then decided to go abroad. And I had many different intercultural experiences. I was a medical missionary for a while, and then worked in China and the Middle East. And during that time, I began as an English teacher and trainer, but then moved on to the space of cross-cultural coach. And there's many things about communication that really will allow you to understand that there are cultural differences, not just language differences that can separate us. So what I do now is I coach leaders on cultural intelligence so they can build their skills to manage and adapt and be with people from around the globe in a confident way. And my approach is very holistic. It's down to earth. It deals with real life situations and how you're going to approach life and your encounters in your business or in your life at large. And so I've seen a lot of my clients have this eureka moment when they've been working with me, because through my dialogues or conversations, many of them have a lot of international experience, but They never had that cultural dimension that has totally changed the framework and how they approach their situations. And so I've seen people completely change their approach, change their mindset, and it has opened up the world to them and has changed the way that they work with their intercultural teams or the way that they work abroad.
Claudia, you are very humble. I know the work you do and how you fast track individuals in their careers. So you do an amazing job of that. So again, I'm an image consultant and personal stylist with Dulsadik. And the reason why I've been so fascinated by the idea of cultural intelligence and awareness was when I, as a child growing up and even connecting with you, Claudia, really seeing how it creates so much stress and anxiety for people. I know I had a client recently who was pitching to investors in Abu Dhabi, and it was a lot of pressure for her to really relay the information correctly and accurately to achieve her organization's goals. And I didn't want her to feel stressed out about what she was going to wear. I really wanted her to focus on her presentation and the skills and intelligence that she has, and she's amazing at the work that she does. And to see the stress and the time that it takes for her to figure out what to wear and how to wear it and what's appropriate and what's inappropriate in terms of being a woman in this space and in her position led me to realize that it's not just about following trends or looking good, but really being able to do so in a way that is easy and that gets our message across effectively. And so I do work with women on their wardrobes, professional and otherwise, teaching them and training them on how to present themselves in their executive image in different settings so that they never have to have that feeling like the client that I just mentioned.
No, and that's wonderful. And that leads us to talk about what is cultural intelligence exactly. So let me just explain that cultural intelligence is different than cultural competency. It's different than knowing the history or facts about a country. It's different than understanding even the fact that different cultures have a sense of individualism and others collectivism. When we talk about cultural intelligence, I want you to think about it in a way that we talk about emotional intelligence. It's more of a perception skill. It's an ability to work in the moment, understand emotions, and adapt to people. So that's similar to, so that's what cultural intelligence is essentially. We know how to act effectively in these national or ethnic organizational cultures, and we know how to apply our knowledge. Application is key. This is a very practical skill. And we know how to adapt our behavior, our mannerisms, and even the clothes that we wear to these environments. So what is cultural intelligence and what is it not? So it's not stereotyping and it's not cultural appropriation. And why is it not stereotyping? Well, because stereotyping tends to have a very negative stigma. And here we're trying to actually dissolve that. We're trying to actually give you a real representation of how people are and how they operate. And we're not culturally appropriating because we're still authentic selves. Right? So we're still our behavior. We're just learning how to make it look a little different in this environment. So,
and I think that word authenticity is key.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's going to be a common thread in everything that we talk about. So why does actually this training challenge your stereotypes? Well, I'll tell you very briefly that most of us who haven't traveled or worked with a lot of intercultural groups, right? People from different places, we know about the world through media. I know before I went to China, I had a very media heavy perspective on what China was. And maybe that was because of a lack of knowledge. I didn't have this type of training, right? All I knew from China was from the movies, from the news that of course has their own bias, or maybe from a vacation or two. But I really didn't know anything about the people, how they acted, and how to understand them. And so when we do this training, people like me, people who have lived there, have real experiences. We talk about our stories. We also use a lot of case studies and research from a true experience. We work with those businesses and we get all that information together so we can give you more of a holistic view, a more accurate view. And then finally, we're not talking about every individual. We're not saying everyone will act this way. We're just explaining norms. Common trends of behavior that collective groups of people could tend towards. And so, yeah, and so we have to really keep the individual in mind here and know that we are giving you guidelines, almost like the pirate code in the Pirates of the Caribbean. These are guidelines. This is not
Right.
always going to be there all the time.
And I would really want to encourage people to reflect
Yes.
on times when they have maybe felt some frustration trying to work with someone, and looking back and analyzing, was it really just the individual, or were there underlying reasons, a lack of cultural awareness on, the part of that individual or yourself, that might have led to that situation?
Exactly. And so that's what we talk about when we do cultural intelligence is we are constantly reflecting. And so what's the journey essentially of a culturally intelligent person? And some people have this very naturally, but others might not. So let's talk about what are the 8 things that I think are the most essential components to build your cultural intelligence. So first we need to be curious. We need to ask the why. Why are they like this? Or who is this? Who is this person? And we have to be
Channel
curious.
that
We want
inner
to sit with
child.
them. What? Sorry.
Channel that inner child and be
Exactly.
curious.
You have to your channel your inner child. You need to be curious. You need to want to explore. And that is going to then open yourself up to the knowledge. And through the knowledge, you're going to build your awareness. Through their awareness, you should have respect for the other, kind of consider the fact that they're coming from a completely different perspective that you are, right? And we slow down instead of automatically responding, right? We have the empathy so that we can start to see from their worldview. And then that will lead us to reflect and then flex our muscles, learn to be flexible in our situations, and then adapt appropriately while staying authentic to ourselves.
Right. Adaptability is key for
100%.
sure.
100%. So who needs cultural intelligence? Well, let me list a few, okay? So global executives, leaders, 100%. We need project managers, expats, educators, international team members, marketing and sales professionals, customer service representatives, diplomats. I would say I worked in DC for a while, and there were many diplomats that I knew that, or I had associated with, that actually didn't know a lot of cultural intelligence. And that was something that kind of shocked me. And so I think even we tend to then, again, I say talk about cultural knowledge, but cultural intelligence is something else. And I could see that there was something lacking there. So you
And
can
this
see
is
that so many.
definitely for individuals at different stages of their career, correct? Whether
Exactly.
you're starting out or even if you think you're a seasoned executive, there's always something to learn and
Well,
grow with.
exactly, because I consider cultural intelligence like speaking a foreign language. Because it's an adaptability skill, it's something that we do in the moment. We need to constantly be engaged with those other groups so that we can flex those muscles. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you guys right now has this been you before? And do you want these things, right? Do you want to make a good impression, but are unsure of the proper greetings or topics of conversation in a foreign space?
Yeah. And we'll talk about, I think, a little bit the why as well, right?
Oh, yes,
In terms of
100%.
like, why does it matter?
Well, let's just give a few numbers here. So, according to Harvard Business Review, over 70% of failed international ventures are due to cultural misunderstandings. That's a
Wow.
huge number.
That's a lot of
70%.
money.
That's a lot of money. So coming from our American, money making perspective, yes, that is a lot of money, and it's gonna cost us time, money, and energy. So this is gonna fast track a lot of things if we know what we're doing. So let's just talk about a few points that you're gonna increase, like you're gonna become better at if you have CQ. You're gonna have your personal growth, which is 100% essential for you as a leader. You're gonna be able to clearly communicate what your intentions are and understand what the other person's intentions are and get things done. And as we know, communication is probably 90% of the battle. Let's be quite honest. You're going to be more innovative and creative. You're going to have enhanced decision making. You'll be able to resolve the conflicts, which is probably another big one. You'll have better inclusivity. People are going to feel accepted and then want to work together. We're going to have improved relationships. 100% that's important for our business ventures. And then we're going to have that competitive edge, which is going to save us a lot of time and money also.
Right. And I mean, just to be able to go into a more positive corporate environment
Oh,
versus a
yeah.
toxic
Yes.
corporate environment where you're consistently feeling stuck day in and day out. I think that's huge as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, back to our questions. I wanted to ask you guys, do you want to avoid sounding rude unintentionally? And this is something that I think is a big thing and causes a lot of rifts is that we are rude unintentionally. We don't want to offend someone, but we do it accidentally and we have no idea and it can make or break a deal. You know, do we want to lead effectively and are unsure of how to build trust and rapport with our target culture? I just wanted to briefly mention a story that happened to me while I was in China. I remember coming to a meeting and I thought I was going to get right down to business and finish things up in 15 minutes and move on. But once I walked into, my Chinese colleague and business partner's office, um, she didn't get right down to business and started asking me a bunch of personal questions. And I thought in the beginning, oh, this is a little strange. But you know what? It's okay. I'm going to step back. I'm going to roll with it. Let's see where this goes. And I was okay. I let the conversation happen. And at the end of 45 minutes, she then said, whatever you want to do, I trust that you're going to take care of it. You do a great job.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But during those 45 minutes, how did you feel about answering what you would view as personal questions from in a
Well,
professional setting?
it's funny because in that moment, I I first thought, okay, this is probably not appropriate in the American business space, but I'm not in America. So maybe they do things differently here. And that's actually immediately what came to my mind. So I said, let me step back and I'm not going to become offended. I'm just going to let this happen because they probably do things differently here. So, automatically I kind of had that sense of let me step back, let me see how it's going to go. So I just flowed
Right.
with it. And I
So you
think
at least had that awareness of
yes,
let me just be a little bit open
let
to
me
this
be open.
interaction.
And it's funny because after the end of that conversation, I went to talk to my Chinese friends about what happened. I said, this was so strange. And they said, why is it strange? I said, because we just don't do that. She says, you don't talk to the person you're doing business with. And so for me, I realized that that was their normal. That was the way they approach business in a very relationship based way. They wanted to build your trust, get to know you. The term guanqi is actually what is very commonly used for building that trust in a Chinese culture so you can do business. And I think that's something that catches a lot of new, I guess, Westerners when they first go to China is they're not familiar with this approach, and so it's very important, right, for that. So let's talk about the timeline. Let's talk about what we need to do to build our cultural intelligence. We need to first start with the awareness of our own culture. What's our culture? What are our preferences? What's our normal, right? Then we need to learn what are the types of things that differ culturally: collectivism, individualism, time flexibility, things like that. Then we need to learn and know in the moment in our life what is a cultural situation, to identify it, which is very important for leaders to know how to do. And then finally, it's managing the situation.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead. And I just want to make sure that this is streaming live. Okay, go ahead.
So I love this image and model of culture, and especially when we talk about national culture. We have two essential levels, right? We have the surface view, the iceberg, right, that is above the water. But as you can tell, there's a huge amount of ice that is underneath the water, right? So in the sense of culture, there are things that we can just see, observe, and understand very easily. And those are things like music, performing arts, food. How many times we talk about culture, we talk about the food that we're eating in different places. But what's a lot more difficult to learn are the things below the surface. These are things that are more invisible. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of reflection to understand them. So for example, we have social status expectations, which is, I think, a huge one. We talk about assumptions, importance of time, and gender roles.
Right.
So,
And gender interactions, right? I think that's a really huge one. I remember a story being relayed to me of an individual who was working in a predominantly tech engineering male field. And they had mentioned, and they, of course, were coming from a different cultural background than the American culture. And they said that there was a group of individuals that had entered, and they were greeting each individual with a handshake. And so there was actually one female team member, and he did not shake her hand.
Yeah.
And the reason why he did not is because the culture in which he was raised, it was considered disrespectful to touch another woman, even if it was just a handshake, which is very normal for us in the States. And while his intention was to be respectful, she perceived that differently. She perceived that as insulting, as not being acknowledged in that space. And so, things like that create a lot of stress and frustration and anger. And people feel insulted because, she was the only woman in the room. I'm sure she'd worked pretty hard to get there, very talented. And from her view, she was being dismissed by this man. And so situations like that can most certainly be avoided when we understand what the other person's perspective is, but also if we communicate it, right?
Exactly.
So, hey,
Yes.
in my culture, typically it's not considered respectful to shake the hand of an individual from the opposite gender. Is that something you're comfortable with? And people, even if they're like, well, why are they asking me that? It's better to put it out there and communicate
Oh,
than
yeah.
to not say at all.
No, 100%. Communication and over communication, though it may annoy some, is actually going to be your safer bet.
Absolutely. And
So
so,
that's, yeah.
For sure.
So no, as Batul said, this is the process that we need to take. We need to step back, and what are some of the ways that we can build this cultural intelligence? I mean, many of us don't have the ability to do this over the course of many years. We need to streamline it. And maybe we've been doing this type of work, but we've had frustrations and we don't know how to get past it. So what do we need to do? Well, there's a few things that I recommend. First, I do think that you should have country-specific training to get that initial awareness of the differences, whether that's something on the surface level of culture or the deeper level of culture. But this can go down to things like values and assumptions. I'm sure in the situation with those two individuals, if they knew things about the country and the values, then they would understand, right? And then we can do things like cross-cultural differences in terms of business, in terms of marketing, which is a huge one. And so that can kind of target a specific kind of niche of culture that we need to know. And then finally, we can use general cultural intelligence situational training, which is what I do. I try to work through your circumstances in your life and work with you individually. And then we also, this is very important, we need to do some trial and error through life experience. We need to go out there, we need to practice doing cultural intelligence.
So, and we're hoping through this training, the errors will be reduced.
Oh, 100%. That's the goal, right? The more you know, the less you're going to mess up. So let's talk about some of the key principles for your business. What are the essential frameworks? So these are the 8 that I think are very valuable and really important. So we're going to start with communication. So we communicate differently. Some are more implicit and some are more explicit. Some say things very literally, and some cultures you have to read between the lines. Right? Evaluating, how are we giving feedback? Are we giving feedback in a very flowery way, or are we getting right to the critical review? How are we leading? Leading, I think, is a very important one because this is also connects to style, right? Maybe a leader like a Steve Jobs character can walk around in his jeans and his shirt, and we respect him in his leadership because he's like one of us. But if you did the same thing in China, this probably wouldn't fly, or the Middle East, to be quite frank with you. You're going to definitely want to err on that side of formality and wear that business suit to gain respect. And then in persuading, there's completely different styles in regards to persuasion. How do we start our presentation? Do we start with theory? Do we start with practical application and tell you why this matters? Right? What are we going to do? How are we going to shift that? Decision making. How are we deciding? How are we coming to a consensus? Are we working together with the team, or are we top down? How are we building trust? As I mentioned, the Chinese example, there are countries that have a far more relationship-based view of building trust rather than skills-based or task-based. How do we deal with disagreement? This is a big one. How many times people will say, wow, that other culture, they just seem so aggressive, they're so confrontational, and others that just want to shy
They're
away,
so
and
direct,
they're so
right? Yeah.
direct, and they're intense. So right, the confrontation versus no, I don't want to fight. And then finally scheduling time. What does time mean? What does 1 p.m. mean? 1 p.m. does it mean 1:15? Like, what does exactly that mean in the business context?
That is
So
a
these things.
huge source of stress, scheduling,
Oh
right?
yeah,
When we feel like someone is wasting our time.
exactly.
Um,
So let's talk about how we approach cultural differences in the moment. So it's great. We learned a bunch of theory. We've learned a bunch of things about cultural in general. But now, how do we deal with the moment? And well, this is where we talk about the cultural cocktail, the intercultural cocktail. As you know, the situation life is a mixture. It's the individual, it's the context, and it's the culture. So it's when all these things collide that we have the moment. And that's what we're trying to do, is help you dissect the different components and understand the cultural aspects, so then you can deal with the situation appropriately.
and really knowing, is this interaction because of the individual? Are they being difficult? Is there, their cultural awareness that I'm lacking? Or is it really just the context and the situation? And so I think that's a really great way of putting that together. And thank you so much, Claudia,
Thank
for
you.
really being able to, and I know it's a lot of information and you could delve into it much more deeply, but to really just provide that framework is important. And so the idea of, well, how do we take this cultural awareness and intelligence and be able to really translate it into effective executive image and style? Right. So executive presence is a combination of things. We talk about personal appearance and attire, our demeanor, our communication skills, and what we are seeking to convey. So if I'm in a leadership position, or if I want to be promoted to a certain position and I want to be perceived as a leader, being able to convey authority and professionalism, what do I need to do to make sure the way I dress is in alignment with those goals? And so it's really how an individual presents themselves through their style choices. I always encourage that they be authentic. So again, going back to the concept of stereotyping and cultural appropriation, that is not by any means what we are seeking to do. But really how we present ourselves through these style choices, which in turn influences the perceptions of leadership abilities and suitability for certain roles. And we don't want the way we dress to be a hindrance to our professional success, especially when we have the skills, we have the experience and the know-how to move forward in whatever our professional goals really are. And so, really, what are the key components of executive presence? So, there's a lot of different components, and we'll focus more on the attire piece, but what is considered professional in different spaces, grooming and hygiene, accessories, detail, of course, depending where you are in the world, what the weather and climate is, the fabric choices will make a difference. And of course, your posture and your physical bearing. How close are we when we're speaking to someone? Are we putting our hand on their shoulder? Are we maintaining a certain distance? And how is that perceived across different cultures and regions? And I know, Claudia, you had mentioned this before, but again, adaptability. When we can take the framework that you've provided and enhancing our cultural intelligence and being able to adapt to different environments. So the main thing that nobody ever talks about when it comes to how we should dress in a professional setting is knowing your goals. What do you want your style to say about you? And the reality is it can be to ruffle feathers. Sometimes we think
Mhm.
like we have to be accommodating or have to try to do what they're expecting of us. And in some ways, it's a great way to establish a relationship and build that rapport, to make the sale, to be able to train a team of individuals who view you as a leader. But it may be that you're there to ruffle some feathers, to make a statement, whatever that statement may be. To observe the hierarchy means that you really just want to take a step back. You're not trying to
Exactly.
stand out. You just want to observe first and foremost what the situation is so that you can tactfully approach how to communicate, how to behave, and of course, how to dress. So, in terms of approaching what to wear, there are different things you want to look at broadly to be able to decide that effectively. So the first is to really research cultural norms, right? And you can do a Google search, you can ask individuals who may have the experience, but really being in that word you mentioned, Claudia, curious and open, and trying to really ask questions, right? And so we're
Mhm.
observing and emulating local practices. So one is preparation by researching, but then one is once we are there, observing and emulating those practices. And as you mentioned, Claudia, individuals appreciate when you ask questions and try to
Oh,
understand.
100%.
The third piece is erring on the side of formality. So many of us think, well, everybody else is dressed casually and I'll dress casually too. Give yourself permission to be the best dressed person in the room, especially if you are the new person in the room. Because even if everyone else is dressed casually, they are meeting you for the first time. You have 3 seconds to make that first impression and you want to make it count. Because essentially, a large percentage of how people perceive us and our abilities is based on those first 3 seconds. And we don't want to spend weeks, months, years trying to undo those 3 seconds. We want to really take advantage of that. And so, of course, seeking guidance from a professional, doesn't it make it easier to be able to reach out to someone who already has experience in the guidance and the know-how to help you broadly navigate, but then also in individual circumstances that require a little bit more strategy and tact to do that. And so we know now how to approach what to wear. But what are the different factors that determine what we wear, right? So local culture, and we talked about that, and it doesn't just have to be places from around the world or people from other parts of the world and religious groups. It can be a corporate culture, which
Mhm.
may vary from one organization to another. Of course, industry standards, so in politics, in the legal profession, maybe more traditional views of dress are still maintained, but perhaps in IT and construction, it would be otherwise. Knowing the occasion and the context. Are you visiting a construction site? Is a skirt and pumps really the way to go, or do you want to wear more practical shoes that can allow you ease of movement? Knowing the climate and geography, of course, it will help you determine fabrics and how modest or what is considered appropriate in those particular areas. But the biggest one that we neglect is personal branding. Through it all, we want to remain authentic to ourselves. We are not culturally appropriating. And so, one example of this, and I love the example of when noted women in the public eye visit, the Middle East. Maybe it's a political visit. They're journalists, Barbara Walters, Hillary Clinton, Princess Diana. These are all women we know who visited the region. And they tend to, out of respect for the local culture, wear some sort of head covering because that's what's considered normal or appropriate for those settings. And again, the reason for that was to really bridge under the gap of understanding and to build that rapport with the individuals that they were working with or interviewing, for example, to really build trust, going back to that idea of trust. But then we see individuals like Melania Trump, right? So when she did go on a state visit with President Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia, we did not see her on many occasions wearing a head covering. Now, is it because she was unaware? Is it because she was not briefed? Not at all. It was very intentional and it was very on brand for this idea that we as Americans have our own customs, our own way of doing things, and we maintain those customs regardless of where we are. And it's okay for me to be respectful of your culture while you are also respectful of mine and the way that I dress. And so I always find that example interesting because some people, oh my God, she didn't know. Like she knew. She knew exactly what she
Yeah.
was doing. It was intentional. It wasn't a mishap or a mistake. And so the Interchange Institute had this really great, fascinating report, What to Wear Where, Mishaps in the Presentation of Identity Across Cultures. And so that's a really long title. But what we're focusing on is the mishaps piece, right? And so these images of women in different types of attire was presented to a group of respondents coming from different countries and cultural backgrounds. And so you can see some are dressed in different colors, different fabrics, some are more creative or not, some considered more casual, more professional from the Western perspective. And how, based on the culture individuals were coming from, they perceived those women, not just perceiving the way they were dressed, but perceiving who they were and what they were capable of, right? And so what they found was is that there is a uniformity with which people make assumptions based solely on physical appearance. And for my people who are like, it doesn't matter, I know my stuff, I could wear anything, that's not what people should focus on. Maybe it's not, but the reality is that they are.
Well, and the thing
And
is,
they
I
may not
wanted
even
to.
be aware.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
exactly. Well, I wanted to say is, we're talking about first impressions, and if we want to actually make that first impression, we need to know what the assumptions are from our appearance. We need
Yes.
to know what it is so we can be very deliberate, right? Intentional rather than accidental in how we do things and how we approach situations. So you can know your stuff well, but if you don't attract someone, right? As a writer, we always talk about the hook. Right? If you don't have the hook in the beginning, no one's going to keep reading the great content that you have. And so that's the same thing with you. If you have something great, hook them in. So
Yeah,
we have to do that
absolutely. And so there are variations in these assumptions. And so how wonderful would it be if we understood what those variations are, and that cultural values do influence our perceptions of attire appropriateness, which is a whole other conversation, modesty, appropriateness, gender, and all of that. And so really, the point of sharing this study was that it is a complex, um, you know, idea and field of study. And so that's where Claudia and I kind of step in to be able to help make that easier, less stressful, and to navigate it. And so really taking that cultural intelligence, combining it with effective style and image will really help you enhance your executive presence, further your professional goals, build bridges, be able to essentially further your individual goals, but also overall organizational goals. And that is really key. And so for those of you who may have any questions, please do put it in the chat, and Claudia and I will be happy to share that with you. Definitely reach out to us through the website, bhsimageconsulting.com. Thank you, Catherine, and all of you joining. Great insights, Claudia Elias. That's the
Thank
comment.
you.
And, we really, really look forward to following up on this topic, hearing your questions. If you do want the accompanying workbook, please feel free to reach out to us through the website or individually, and we'll be sure to get that to you so that you are able to start on your own journey right away and take this framework and action steps that we described. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we're looking forward to continuing these discussions. So please reach out anytime, and we'll contact you guys, and we'd love to discuss more.